It was Thanksgiving morning, and the house felt colder than the November air outside. The smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie usually filled me with warmth, but today it felt like a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. My kids, my own children, were sitting at the table, barely looking at me. Their faces were tight with anger, their eyes avoiding mine as if I were a stranger. I had tried reaching out for months, but every call went unanswered, every message ignored. Today, I had hoped things might be different. I had hoped Thanksgiving would be a bridge, not a battleground. But as I stepped inside, I realized the divide was wider than ever. The silence was deafening. I could hear the faint clinking of silverware, the whisper of fabric as they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And I felt my heart sink deeper with each passing second. This wasn't just a family dinner. This was a test, a survival test of the bonds I thought were unbreakable. I sat down at the end of the table, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to appear calm. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said softly. The words barely made it past my lips. One of my children muttered a distracted thanks, without making eye contact. The tension in the room was so thick I could almost touch it. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to leave, to escape this cold reception. But I couldn't. I couldn't abandon my family. Not like this. Not after everything. Then I remembered the envelope. I had spent weeks preparing it. It wasn't just paper. It wasn't just money. It was a piece of my heart. Carefully written. Filled with memories, apologies, and love that had never faded despite months of rejection. I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if it could bridge the gap. But I had to try. I took a deep breath and stood up, holding the envelope firmly in my hand. Every eye in the room turned toward me, suspicion and curiosity flickering across their faces. "I have something for each of you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotion inside me. "Open it when you're ready." The room went silent. For a moment, I felt the weight of every harsh word, every cold shoulder, every missed holiday pressed down on me. And then, just for a fleeting second, I saw something shift in their eyes, a hint of curiosity, a glimmer of hope. Could this one envelope, this small gesture, be enough to thaw the ice that had formed between us? Could it survive the tension of years gone wrong and bring my family back together? That was the question. And the answer would change everything. The silence in the house wasn't accidental. It had been building for months, maybe even years, but no one had admitted it until that Thanksgiving morning. The rift between me and my kids wasn't sudden. It was slow, like a river carving a canyon, imperceptible at first, but eventually leaving a chasm too wide to ignore. It started with small disagreements that seemed trivial at the time. The way I offered advice, the way they handled money, even the choice of schools and careers. At first, I thought these arguments were normal, a part of parenting. But then the disagreements turned sharper, words heavier, and the silences grew longer. The laughter that once filled the house was replaced by tension. The warm, familiar voices of my children now carried undertones of resentment I couldn't ignore. The conflict escalated last summer. A disagreement over finances blew up into a full-blown argument that left all of us in tears. Harsh words were exchanged, accusations hurled, and, in the aftermath, a coldness settled between us. I tried reaching out, sending messages, making calls, asking to talk. Every effort was met with silence or polite but distant replies. It was as if a wall had been built overnight, separating me from the very people I had dedicated my life to raising. Every holiday since then had been strained. Thanksgiving, once my favorite, had become the most painful. My children's eyes avoided mine, their conversations carefully steered away from anything personal. And I began to feel something I never thought possible: hopelessness. Could a parent survive the emotional distance of children who no longer wanted to connect? Could a family survive when love was met with resentment? The rift wasn't just emotional, it was practical too. Invitations went unanswered, plans were canceled at the last minute, and traditions we had once cherished were quietly abandoned. It felt like living in a house full of strangers who shared my blood, but not my heart. Every corner reminded me of what was lost: the empty chairs at the table, the untouched dishes, the absence of laughter echoing through the rooms. I knew my children loved me somewhere deep down, but the bridge we once walked together had crumbled under the weight of misunderstandings, unspoken grievances, and pride. And yet, despite the pain, I refused to give up. I refused to let this Thanksgiving be another chapter of regret. Somewhere beneath the tension and anger, there was still a chance for survival, a chance to rebuild, to reconnect, to remind them that love could withstand even the harshest storms. And so, I planned. Not with grand gestures or empty promises, but with something meaningful, something personal, something that spoke louder than arguments, silence, or resentment. The envelope I held in my hand was more than paper and ink. It was a lifeline, a symbol of hope, a bridge that I prayed would reach my children's hearts. The rift was real. The distance was tangible. But hope was stronger. And I knew that to survive this family drama, to heal this Thanksgiving conflict, I had to take a step that was terrifying, vulnerable, and utterly necessary. I had to reach across the chasm and trust that love could still conquer the silence. After the argument months ago, the house had changed in ways I could never have imagined. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, almost alive. Every room felt like a reminder of absence: absent laughter, absent warmth, absent connection. My children moved through the house like ghosts of themselves, polite but distant, avoiding anything that might trigger another fight. Thanksgiving morning had become a minefield. I could feel it the moment I walked in. The familiar aromas of roasted turkey and spiced pumpkin couldn't mask the tension that hung like fog in every corner. My heart ached, but my fear was stronger. Fear that no matter what I did, nothing could bring them back. Fear that this silence, this rift, might be permanent. They sat at the table, each one lost in their own thoughts, their eyes darting away whenever mine met theirs. The room was quiet, but not calm, the kind of quiet that presses down on your chest, that makes every breath feel like a test. I wanted to speak, to reach out, to break through the wall that had grown between us, but every word I imagined sounded hollow. Every attempt at conversation had ended in tension before. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I poured coffee, my hands trembling slightly, and tried to make eye contact. One child, barely a teenager still in my mind, avoided me completely, staring at a phone screen as if it held the answers I couldn't give. Another, older now, sat rigid, lips pressed together, refusing to respond to my greetings. I tried small talk at first. "Did you sleep well?" I asked. A simple, harmless question, but it bounced off the walls, met with monosyllabic replies, eye rolls, and tense nods. Every smile I offered was returned with polite avoidance, every attempt at warmth deflected by cold indifference. This wasn't just silence, it was survival mode. My children had built defenses around their hearts, walls stronger than any physical barrier. They were protecting themselves from disappointment, from pain, from the vulnerability that comes with loving someone who had, in their eyes, failed them. And I understood. I knew that beneath their anger, beneath the cold exterior, there was hurt. Hurt I had caused. Hurt I hadn't even realized until it was too late. As the minutes passed, I noticed the subtle ways the tension manifested. A hand trembling over a fork, a sigh that carried months of frustration, a glance toward the clock that seemed to say, "How long until this ends?" Every gesture, every pause, every quiet breath was a reminder of the rift. And yet, there was something else I saw too, a flicker of curiosity, a tiny crack in the wall of silence, a question unspoken in their eyes. What is next? I decided to wait, to respect the silence, but to prepare for the moment that could change everything. The envelope sat in my pocket, heavy with intention, heavier with hope. I had spent nights writing, rewriting, tearing up drafts, trying to find the words that could cut through months of resentment. Words that could survive anger and fear, that could pierce the armor they had built around their hearts. The silence pressed down on me, but I didn't flinch. I didn't leave. I couldn't leave. This was the moment that mattered. The moment that could decide whether our family would survive or whether the gap would widen beyond repair. I could feel the weight of history, of arguments, of broken promises, but I also felt a spark of determination, a spark that refused to let silence define us. Because sometimes survival doesn't mean walking away. Sometimes survival means staying, even when it hurts, even when it's terrifying, even when the silence seems unbearable. Sometimes survival means trusting that love, no matter how battered, can still find its way through the darkness. And in that silence, I felt it, the first sign that the envelope, the words I had written, might finally be able to do what I had hoped. A flicker of attention, a tiny pause, a subtle shift in posture. The moment before everything changes. I sat there, staring at my children, each of them so close, yet impossibly distant. The silence was unbearable, the weight of months pressing down like a stone on my chest. Every instinct in me screamed for action, for connection, for a miracle. But what could I do? Words alone hadn't worked. Conversations had failed. Even my presence seemed to irritate them, a reminder of old arguments, of disappointment and unmet expectations. Then I felt it, the envelope in my pocket, heavy against my thigh. I had been carrying it with me for weeks, preparing, rewriting, second-guessing every word. This envelope wasn't just paper. It wasn't just letters or money. It was a piece of my heart, a last-ditch attempt to survive the chasm that had grown between us. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. Decision isn't always easy, especially when it comes to parenting grown children who are angry, hurt, and distant. I had to choose between remaining in the shadows of their resentment or stepping into vulnerability, risking more rejection for a chance at reconciliation. The choice was terrifying, but the alternative, continued silence, continued estrangement, was worse. I remembered every Thanksgiving we had shared before the rift. The laughter around the table, the smell of roasted turkey mingling with the scent of cinnamon and pumpkin, the sound of my children's voices singing along to old holiday songs. Those memories were a lifeline, a reminder that what had been broken could, perhaps, be repaired. Survival wasn't just about enduring the silence. It was about daring to change it. I took a deep breath and slid the envelopes from my pocket. Each was carefully labeled with their names. My hand shook slightly, not from fear of the task, but from the intensity of the emotions tied to it. this wasn't about money or apologies alone. It was about connection, about reminding them that despite anger, despite disagreements, I loved them unconditionally. That my role as a parent didn't end when they grew up, didn't end when they were hurt, didn't end when life tested us all. I stood up, holding the envelopes with deliberate calm. "I have something for each of you," I said softly, my voice trembling despite my effort to remain composed. Every eye in the room snapped toward me, surprise and suspicion dancing across their faces. The air shifted slightly, the tension momentarily broken by curiosity. Could it really be this simple? Could one envelope, one gesture, be enough to pierce through the walls months of conflict had built? The decision had to be made carefully. I couldn't force them to open it. I couldn't demand their attention or their gratitude. I had to offer it and let them choose. Parenting, after all, isn't about control. It's about guiding, about giving, about hoping that love will prevail. I placed the envelopes gently on the table in front of them. Each one stared at it, hesitant, as if it carried both danger and salvation in its paper folds. And then came the moment of truth, the pause before action, the suspended heartbeat of uncertainty. Would they see it as a threat? Another attempt at manipulation? Another reminder of past mistakes? Or would they see it for what it truly was? A lifeline, a bridge, a tangible reminder that family could survive even the deepest wounds. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. This decision, to offer the envelopes, to step into vulnerability, to risk rejection one more time, was the culmination of months of reflection and hope. It was terrifying, it was humbling, and it was necessary. Because survival in family drama isn't about avoiding pain. It's about choosing love even when it's hard, even when it's risky, even when the silence feels impossible to break. As I stepped back slightly, giving them space, I saw the first flickers of reaction. Fingers hesitated over the envelopes, eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. The decision wasn't mine anymore, it was theirs. And in that suspended moment, I realized that hope, fragile but persistent, had a chance to prevail. The room was still silent, but this time, it was different. It wasn't suffocating, it was expectant, waiting for the moment that could change everything. The envelopes sat on the polished wooden table, small rectangles that held the weight of months, no, years, of distance, anger, and unspoken words. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I watched my children glance at them. Their fingers hovered uncertainly over the paper, hesitant to touch it, as if opening one could change everything or confirm their worst fears. I held my breath. Finally, one of them, the youngest, picked up the envelope. Fingers trembling, eyes wide, they tore the seal slowly, cautiously, as though the act itself carried enormous significance. I could see every micro-expression flicker across their face. Surprise, confusion, suspicion. And then they unfolded the letter inside. It was more than words. It was memory. I had written about the first time I held them in my arms, the nights I stayed awake when they were sick, the countless moments I had quietly cheered for their achievements when no one else noticed. I had shared stories only a parent could tell, things that belonged to our family alone, stitched with love, remorse, and hope. Their eyes began to glisten. The youngest read and reread, as if trying to absorb every syllable, every sentiment. Then came the first audible gasp. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know you felt this way," they whispered, voice breaking. I didn't respond. I let them read, let the words sink in. One by one, the others followed, picking up their own envelopes with cautious curiosity. The tension in the room shifted subtly, like a door opening in a long-locked house. Some faces were etched with disbelief. "Is this real?" one of the older children asked, eyes darting toward me, searching for hidden motives. I shook my head gently, silently signaling that this was genuine, that it was my truth, my love, my plea for connection. Inside each envelope, besides the letters, I had placed small tokens, memories captured in photographs, keepsakes from family vacations, even a modest amount of money set aside for their future. Nothing extravagant, but meaningful, something tangible to accompany the words that had been buried under months of silence and conflict. The reactions were instantaneous. The youngest hugged the letter to their chest, tears streaming freely now. The middle child held theirs with both hands, blinking rapidly, struggling to contain a sob. The eldest stared, jaw tight, as if fighting against vulnerability, but I saw it, the softening of features, the crack in the armor that had kept them distant for so long. I remained quiet, letting the envelopes speak, letting the love, the regret, the hope, and the memories do what my words over months hadn't managed. There was a fragile beauty in watching them process it, each reaction different, each meaningful. Shock, disbelief, guilt, awe, relief, all mingled together in a silent symphony of emotion. One child finally looked up at me, voice trembling. I didn't realize how much you cared, how much you've always cared," they said. It was the first acknowledgment of their own pain, and of mine. The room, once frozen in the cold tension of resentment, now seemed alive with the possibility of reconciliation. The envelopes had done more than survive the silence. They had pierced it. They had turned months of avoidance, resentment, and unresolved anger into an emotional breakthrough. The shock, the awe, the slow understanding on their faces made every sleepless night, every worry, every moment of self-doubt worth it. In that moment, I realized something crucial. Survival in family drama isn't about avoiding confrontation or waiting for time to heal. It's about creating opportunities, about reaching across divides with honesty and love, about daring to trust that your children, even when they are angry or hurt, still carry a piece of your heart within them. The envelope had spoken louder than any apology could. It had survived their skepticism, their anger, their defenses, and in doing so, it had opened a doorway back to family, back to connection, back to love. For the first time in months, the house felt warmer, not because of the turkey in the oven, nor the autumn sunlight streaming through the windows, but because the silence had begun to melt, replaced by something far more powerful: understanding, acknowledgment, and hope. The room was quiet, but it was no longer suffocating. The envelopes had done their work, but now came the true reveal: the unspoken emotions that had been buried under months of anger, resentment, and misunderstanding. I watched as my children processed the letters, their faces a canvas of conflicting feelings. Shock lingered in wide eyes, as if they couldn't believe what they were reading. Disbelief soon gave way to tears, silent at first, then rolling freely down their cheeks. The youngest clutched the envelope to their chest, trembling, as if holding on to it could somehow make sense of the months of distance between us. I had no idea," whispered one, voice shaking. I thought you didn't understand or care." The confession hung in the air, raw and unfiltered, cutting through the tension like a sharp knife. But beneath it, I sensed a shift. Recognition, acknowledgement, the beginnings of understanding. The eldest, who had been the most guarded, stiffened at first. Jaw tight, hands gripping the table, eyes avoiding mine. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, their shoulders relaxed. Their hands opened, releasing the envelope onto the table. For the first time in months, I saw vulnerability, fear, remorse, and a glimmer of hope mixed in their gaze. The walls they had built around their heart were cracking. This was the reveal, not just of my intentions, not just of the letters or keepsakes, but of the buried emotions. The anger that had seemed insurmountable, the cold distance that had felt permanent, the resentment that had dominated our interactions. All were being exposed, laid bare in a way that demanded attention and understanding. I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to speak too soon. Words could come later. Actions, gestures, and the simple act of showing love had to speak first. I needed them to feel the authenticity, the sincerity behind every line, every memory, every word in those envelopes. Then came the first reach, tentative and careful. The youngest extended an arm toward me, hesitant, testing the waters. I met it immediately, taking their hand in mine. It was small, fragile, but it was contact, the first bridge across the rift. I'm sorry, muttered the middle child, voice barely audible. For being so cold. For shutting you out. The apology was awkward, incomplete, but it was genuine, and that was enough. Enough to begin rebuilding, enough to start healing the wound that had seemed so deep just minutes ago. One by one, the others followed. The eldest hesitated, then finally said, I was wrong too. I should have tried to understand. A simple admission, yet monumental in its significance. The tension in the room softened, replaced by tentative warmth and relief. We didn't hug immediately, not all at once. That would have been too much, too fast. But we made eye contact, exchanged small, meaningful gestures, hand on shoulder, a brief touch of the arm, a shared look of acknowledgment. These small actions were the first threads weaving our family back together, fragile but strong. I realized something crucial in that moment. Family survival isn't about grand gestures alone. It isn't about perfect words or flawless apologies. It's about showing up, staying present, risking vulnerability, and allowing those you love to see your heart. The envelope had sparked the reveal, but the real work, rebuilding trust, reestablishing connection, embracing love, was only beginning. The Thanksgiving table, once a symbol of distance and tension, now held promise. The food, the candles, even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed brighter, warmer. It wasn't just a meal anymore, it was a turning point. A subtle yet profound acknowledgement that despite conflict, despite hurt, family could survive. For the first time in months, I felt it, the flicker of hope growing into warmth. The rift that had seemed unbridgeable was beginning to mend, thread by thread, word by word, gesture by gesture. And as my children glanced at one another, sharing silent understanding and tentative smiles, I knew that this Thanksgiving, though born from conflict, had become a true beginning, a reveal of emotions, of truths, and of the enduring power of family love. The tension that had gripped the house for months began to melt like snow under the morning sun. After the reveal of the envelopes, after the tears and the tentative apologies, the atmosphere shifted from icy distance to cautious warmth. Every glance, every small gesture became a step toward reconciliation, a path back to what we had lost. I watched my children slowly gather around the table, hesitant at first, but now more present than they had been in months. Their hands brushed mine, Their eyes met mine with a flicker of connection, and I felt the weight of estrangement start to lift. There were still traces of tension, remnants of hurt that couldn't disappear instantly. But the openness, the willingness to engage, signaled that healing had begun. We talked. Slowly, carefully, each word measured, each emotion acknowledged. The youngest shared memories I hadn't even known they remembered, moments of joy, laughter, and love that had been overshadowed by anger. The middle child admitted to feeling misunderstood and overlooked, opening a door for dialogue I had longed for. Even the eldest, who had seemed the most resistant, spoke softly about regret, about realizing that distance had only magnified pain rather than solving it. The conversation was not perfect. There were pauses, moments of hesitation, even uncomfortable silences. But that was part of the process. True reconciliation isn't immediate or flawless. It's gradual, deliberate, and requires patience. It's about creating space for honesty, allowing vulnerability, and embracing the discomfort of truth. At one point, I reached across the table and took their hands in mine. "I know I've made mistakes," I said quietly, "and I know you've been hurt. But I also know that no matter what, my love for you has never changed. This is our family, and families survive through everything. Through mistakes, misunderstandings, even silence." A soft murmur of agreement followed. They nodded, tears glistening, smiles tentative but genuine. For the first time in months, I felt the invisible walls between us crumble. The warmth that returned to the room wasn't just emotional. It was tangible, a presence that could be felt in every corner, in every glance, in every shared breath. We laughed, cautiously at first, then with increasing ease. We remembered past Thanksgivings, old jokes, and funny mishaps that had once united us. We shared plans for the future, small promises to communicate better, to be more present, to not let conflict fester in silence. Each commitment, each shared laugh, was a brick in the bridge we were rebuilding, a bridge that had been nearly destroyed, but was now strong enough to carry us forward. The meal, once a symbol of tension and avoidance, became a celebration of survival. Not just surviving the holiday, but surviving the emotional rift that had threatened to separate us forever. Every bite, every clink of silverware, every shared glance reinforced the notion that family, no matter how fractured, could find its way back to unity. As the evening wore on, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to make things right, for the courage to step into vulnerability, and for the resilience of my children's hearts. They had been hurt, yes, but they had chosen to trust, to forgive, and to reconnect. And in doing so, they had reminded me that the bonds of family are rarely broken beyond repair. They only need a spark of love and a willingness to survive. By the time the sun began to set, the house was filled with warmth, laughter, and stories. The envelopes had served their purpose. They had opened doors, broken silences, and sparked reconciliation. But the true work was in the moments that followed. The conversations, the shared smiles, the gentle touches, and the acknowledgement that love, patience, and understanding are what allow a family to endure. That Thanksgiving, we didn't just eat together. We reconnected, rebuilt, and reaffirmed the unspoken truth that families, even after conflict, even after months of distance, can heal. The silence had been replaced by dialogue, the resentment replaced by empathy, and the emotional gap bridged by trust and affection. In that room, on that day, survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about thriving together, as a family once again. As the last crumbs of pie were cleared from the table, and the autumn sun dipped low behind the windows, I sat quietly, reflecting on the whirlwind of emotions that had carried us through the day. Thanksgiving had always been a holiday of gratitude, a time to gather and celebrate, but this year it had become something far more profound, a lesson in resilience, love, and the enduring power of family. Looking back, I realized the rift had not been caused by a single mistake, nor could it be fixed by a single gesture. It had been the accumulation of misunderstandings, unspoken grievances, and prideful hearts. Months of silence and avoidance had magnified minor conflicts into seemingly insurmountable divides, and yet, despite the hurt, the anger, and the distance, there had always been hope, a quiet, persistent hope that family bonds tested by time and tension could survive. The envelopes had been a catalyst, yes, but the real work, the survival of our family, lay in what followed. The willingness to listen, the courage to acknowledge mistakes, and the choice to forgive. I realized that parenting doesn't end when children grow up, and love doesn't diminish when conflicts arise. True parenting is guiding, supporting, and sometimes humbling yourself to rebuild bridges, even when it feels terrifying. One of the most powerful lessons I learned is that family drama is inevitable. Disagreements happen, pride gets in the way, and hearts get hurt. But emotional survival is possible when we approach conflicts with honesty, vulnerability, and an unwavering commitment to connection. Silence, while tempting as a shield against confrontation, can deepen wounds. Words, actions, and intentional gestures, like the envelopes, can reopen doors that seemed closed forever. I also learned that reconciliation is not instant. It doesn't come from grand apologies or dramatic gestures alone. It is gradual, fragile, and requires patience. Every small acknowledgement, every tentative step forward, every shared memory and tear contributes to rebuilding trust. The journey from resentment to understanding is rarely linear, but each moment of openness brings healing. Watching my children gradually soften, laugh again, and reconnect reminded me of the profound resilience of the human heart, especially the hearts of those we love most. Even when anger and hurt dominate, there is a spark of love that survives, waiting for recognition. That spark, nurtured with care, can reignite bonds thought lost. As we shared our first post-reconciliation conversation, I understood the deeper meaning of Thanksgiving that year. Gratitude was no longer simply about counting blessings or appreciating material comforts. It was about recognizing the value of family, even when flawed, even when tested. Gratitude meant cherishing the moments of vulnerability, the courage to apologize, and the decision to forgive. For anyone watching this story, the lessons are clear. Never underestimate the power of connection, the impact of sincere communication, or the strength of love that persists despite conflict. Family survival is possible, but it requires action, courage, and intentionality. Holding on to pride or waiting for the perfect moment can allow silences to fester. Choosing to act, even in small ways, can transform pain into healing. That day, as we embraced around the table, I felt a profound sense of hope. The rift that had seemed permanent was no longer a chasm, but a bridge, still fragile, still requiring care, but solid enough to carry us forward. The envelopes had sparked the change, but it was the willingness of all of us to engage, forgive, and rebuild that ensured our survival. Ultimately, Thanksgiving had become more than a holiday. It had become a testament to the resilience of family, the transformative power of love, and the profound lessons embedded in emotional survival. Family drama, conflict, and misunderstanding are inevitable. But hope, patience, and courage can heal even the deepest wounds. As I looked around the table, I knew this Thanksgiving would be remembered not for the food we shared, but for the love we restored, the walls we dismantled, and the lessons that would guide us through every challenge to come. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift of all.